Chapter 11. Science and Pseudoscience. Anastasia, how have Russians managed to cope with such a huge influx of visitors? It must have been quite a challenge for them. I can just imagine living with your family in your kin's domain with a whole bunch of gawkers staring at you from the other side of the fence. The tourists and foreigners coming to Russia for treatment, Vladimir, have been housed in the cities, in the flats vacated by the Russians. They get produce from the domains delivered to them, but tourists are not allowed to go to the domains themselves. Only a few have managed to visit the places where the new Russians reside. Psychologists are constantly reminding the owners of the domains that whatever hospitality they show to visitors, especially visitors from what used to be considered highly developed countries, can lead to a nervous breakdown. The psychologists are correct. About 40% of foreigners who did visit the domains returned home only to fall into a state of depression, bordering on suicide. How so? Why? You yourself said, Anastasia, that everything in the domains is perfect. The surrounding countryside, the food, the way the family members help each other. That is true, but for many foreign visitors, what they saw turned out to be too perfect. Imagine, if you can, Vladimir, an elderly person who has lived most of their life in a large city. Someone who has tried as hard as they could to earn as much as they could, just to be, so they thought, no worse off than others. In return for this money, they received a roof over their heads, clothing to wear, a car to drive, and food to eat. And here is this person sitting in their furnished flat with a car in the garage and food in the fridge. Well, I am imagining it, and so far everything seems normal. What's next? What's next, Vladimir, is a question you should be able to answer yourself. Next, maybe this person will take a trip somewhere. Maybe they'll buy some new furniture or a new car. And then, I haven't the foggiest. And then this person dies. He dies forever, or at least for millions of Earth years. His second self, his soul, cannot regain the earthly plane of being. It cannot because over the course of his earthly existence, he created nothing good for the earth. Each of us realizes this intuitively, and that is why people are so terrified of death. When a majority of people have the same aspirations and a similar way of life, they have the impression that they can and should live only the way everybody else does. But here man has seen a totally different way of life on the earth. He has seen, in fact, an earthly paradise, a space of love, which can be created by man's own hand in the divine image. And this makes him look upon his own life as already gone by, and spent in hell. And this man dies in torment, and his suffering lasts millions of years. But why doesn't everybody fall into this state of depression after seeing the Russians' new way of life? There are some who realize intuitively that even in their advanced years, if they put their weakening hand to creating a space of love on the earth, the Creator will prolong their life. And after straightening up and with a smile brightening their face, they go and give a hand to younger people. Still, Anastasia, it doesn't seem right that people who come to Russia so far away aren't able to at least spend a little time walking down the streets of the new Russian communities and breathing the clean air. Even the tourists who stay in the cities have the opportunity to feel the fresh breath of earth and drink health-giving water. The cities are caressed by breezes which infuse them with cleanliness, ethers, and pollen from the luxuriant greenery of the domains. And when they go on an out-of-town excursion, Tourists can observe these oases of paradise only from a respectful distance so as not to disturb the families living there. Take a look and see how it all happens. And at once I glimpsed another scene from the future. I saw the highway which runs between the city of Vladimir and another town named Suzdal, 30 kilometers away, a highway I had traveled a number of times before. Earlier, I had only caught the rare glimpse of tourists' motor coaches taking visitors to see Suzdal's ancient cathedrals and monasteries. Most of the cars on the road had borne local license plates, but now the highway was quite different. Beautiful motor coaches rolled along the roadway that was twice the width of the old one. Electric vehicles, no doubt. I couldn't detect any exhaust gases or motor noise, only the quiet hum of the tires. The coaches were filled with tourists of varying nationalities. Many were observing their surroundings through field glasses. About a kilometer from the main road, beyond a motley host of treetops, I could make out the roofs of detached houses. That was where the Russian family domains were situated, each surrounding by an evenly planted hedge or living fence. On either side of the road, approximately 2 kilometers apart, were located nice-looking two-story buildings housing shops and dining salons. Footnote, dining salons. The Russian word here is trapezhnia, originally designating refectories in monasteries, but more recently used in reference to ornately decorated halls, often with arched ceilings, where large groups of people can gather to enjoy traditional Russian meals. Each of these was fronted by a small asphalt lot where an electric vehicle could park if there was a space free. The electric motor coaches spewed forth a stream of tourists who were impatient to taste the local delicacies on the spot or to buy some to take home. All the shops and cafes sold food products grown in the domains. They also had handmade Russian shirts, towels, wood carvings, and many other things made by skilled craftspeople. Anastasia explained that visitors were eager to buy these handicrafts because they knew that a shirt embroidered by the kind hands of a happy woman is immensely more valuable than something off a merchandised conveyor belt. If you looked down from above at what was behind this strip of forest visible from the highway, you would be able to see shady alleys and domains. Alleys, again, is spelled A-L-L-E with an apostrophe above it, E-S. Alleys? Allies? I don't know. I'm just going to call it alleys. If you looked down from above at what was behind the strip of forest visible from the highway, you would be able to glimpse shady alleys and domains outlined by living fences. The strip of forest surrounded a community containing about 90 family estates. About a kilometer distance across the open fields was another community surrounded by a strip of forest, and so on for the next 30 kilometers or so. Even though they were the same size, the domain plots were far from uniform in appearance. Some were dominated by orchard trees. Others featured wild-growing trees, slender pines, loosely spreading cedars, oaks, and birches. Each domain invariably had a pond or a swimming pool. The houses, surrounded by flower beds, were also quite different from one another. Some were large, two-story detached houses. Others were smaller bungalows. They had been built in various styles. Both flat and sloping roofs were to be seen. Some of the little houses were all white, resembling the huts found in Ukrainian villages. I saw no motor cars on the lanes running between the domains, nor for that matter could I detect any special activity or work being done in the domains themselves. I had the impression that all this extraordinary beauty was the creation of someone on high, and that all people needed to do was to delight in his creation. In the middle of each community there were beautiful two-story structures. Around them scurried a host of active children at play. That meant the schools or clubs had been built in the center of the settlements. You see there, Anastasia, in the center of the community, where there's a school or a club, there's some kind of visible life, but in the domains themselves, it looks pretty much like Dullsville. If the owners had managed to arrange the planting so that there is no need to fertilize or do battle with pests and weeds, what's left for them to do? In any case, I can think that man actually finds greater joy in intensive labor, creativity, and inventiveness, but there's none of that here. Vladimir, right here in these splendid domains, people are involved with the very things that you mentioned. Their deeds are meaningful. It demands a significantly higher level of intelligence, mindfulness, and inspiration than the work of artists and inventors in the world that you are accustomed to. But if they are all artists and inventors, then where are the results of their work? Vladimir, do you consider an artist someone who takes brush in hand and paints a beautiful landscape on a sheet of canvas? Of course I do. People will look at his picture, and if they like it, they'll either buy it or put it on display in an art gallery. Then why would you not consider as an artist someone who has taken, instead of a canvas, a hectare of land and used it to create an equally beautiful or even a more beautiful landscape? After all, in order to create a beautiful landscape out of living materials, the creator needs more than artistic imagination and taste. He also needs a knowledge of the properties of a great many living materials. In both instances, it is the task of what has been created to call forth positive emotions in the viewer and to delight the eye. But in contrast to a picture painted on canvas, a living picture has a variety of functions besides. It cleanses the air, it produces beneficial ethers for man and feeds his body. A living picture changes the nuances of its colors, and it can constantly be perfected. It is connected to the universe by invisible threads. It is incomparably more meaningful than something painted on a canvas, and so the artist who creates it will be that much the greater. Okay, of course, I can't really disagree with that, but tell me, why do you consider the owners of these domains to be inventors and scientists to boot? Do they have any relation to science at all? They have a relation to science, too. What kind of relation, for example? For example, do you, Vladimir, not consider a scientist someone who is involved in plant selection and genetic engineering? Of course, everybody thinks of them as scientists. As they work in scientific research institutes, they come up with all new varieties of fruits and vegetables and other plants as well. Yes, of course, they come up with these. But what is important is the result of their work and its significance for humanity. Well, the result is that varieties of vegetables and potatoes are brought forth that are frost-resistant and will not be eaten by the Colorado beetle. In highly developed countries, they have managed to grow a living being from a simple cell. Now they are working on cultivating various organs for transplanting into patients. Kidneys, for example. Yes, that is true. But have you not wondered, Vladimir, why in these highly developed countries there are also appearing more and more types of diseases? Why is it that these same countries have the highest cancer rates of all? Why do they need an increasing number of drugs for treatment? Why do an ever-increasing number of people suffer from infertility? Well, why? Because many of those you call scientists are not rational beings at all. Their human essence is paralyzed, and the forces of destruction work through their merely external human form. Think about it, Vladimir. These so-called scientists have begun to fundamentally change the plants existing in nature, thereby also changing the fruits they bring forth. They have begun changing them without first determining what purpose these fruits have. After all, in nature, as in the universe, everything is so closely interconnected. Let us take your car, for example. Suppose a mechanic were to remove or alter some part, a filter, let's say. The car might go for a while, but what would soon happen? the fuel feed system would go out of whack and the motor would choke. In other words, every part of a motor car has its function, and before touching a part, it is necessary to determine its function. Of course, you don't have to be a mechanic to see that. But nature, after all, is also a perfect mechanism, and nobody has yet fully fathomed it. Every part of this great living mechanism has its purpose and is closely interconnected with the whole structure of the universe. A change in properties or the removal of a single part inevitably affects the work of the whole mechanism of nature. Nature has many protective devices. First, it will signal an impermissible action. If that does not work, nature will be obliged to destroy the mechanic who fails in his calling. Man uses the fruits of nature for food, and if he begins to feed himself with mutant fruits, he will gradually be transformed into a mutant himself. Such an adulteration is inevitable, giving the consumption of adulterated produce. This is already coming about. Man is already experiencing a weakening of his immune system, his mind, and his feelings. He is beginning to lose the abilities unique to him alone, and is being transformed into an easily manipulatable biorobot. He is losing his independence. The appearance of new diseases only confirms this. It is a sign that man has tried undertaking an impermissible action. Let's say you're right, Anastasia. I myself don't think much of these hybrid plants. There was a lot of hoopla about them at first, but now quite a few national governments, including our own, have started mandating special labeling of genetically modified produce sold in stores. And many people try to avoid buying these mutant products, but they say there's no way to avoid them altogether, at least for the time being. There's too many of them. That's not enough real produce, and so it's much more expensive. There's not enough real produce, and so the real produce is much more expensive. There, you see, that is because the forces of destruction have managed to lure humanity into a state of economic dependency. They have managed to convince man that if he does not consume their products, he will die of starvation. But that is not true, Vladimir. Just the opposite. Man will die if he does eat them. Maybe, Anastasia, but not everyone will die. Many already know about this and won't eat mutant products. How do you, for example, Vladimir, manage to tell the difference? I don't eat imported vegetables, for one thing. What local residents sell at the markets from their own household plots is a lot tastier. And where do they get their seeds? What do you mean, where do they get them? They buy them. There's a lot of firms dealing in seeds right now. They sell them in pretty colored packaging. So does that mean that people buy seeds according to the information on the package without knowing for absolute certain how accurate that information is? You mean to say even the seeds they buy may be mutant? Yes. For example, on the earth today, there are only 9 apple trees left, bringing forth original fruit. The apple is one of the most healthful and delicious of all of God's creations for man. But it was one of the first to be subjected to genetic manipulation. Even the Old Testament warns us against grafting. But people went ahead and stubbornly and did it, and as a result, the apples disappeared. What you now find in orchards or grocery stores does not correspond to the divine fruit. Those that violate and destroy the original purity of God's creation you call scientists. But what can we call those who are restoring the functioning of all the parts of nature's mechanism? They're scientists too, but more literate, no doubt, more knowledgeable. The Russian families living in the domains which you see here are the same ones who are restoring that which was ruined before. Where did they acquire greater knowledge than the geneticists and the biologists involved in genetic selection? This knowledge has existed in every man right from the beginning. The goal, thought, and conscious awareness of their purpose afford each of these the opportunity to reveal itself. I'm going to reread that part. This knowledge has existed in every man right from the beginning. The goal, thought, and conscious awareness of their purpose afford each of these the opportunity to reveal itself. Wow. So it turns out that the people living in the domains are both artists and scientists. Who then are we? I mean, the people living on the planet today. Everyone can supply their own definition if they manage to free their thought for at least 9 days.